Alright, Imperial Struggle. Twilight Imperium, Twilight Struggle. Let's combine them too. Not quite. Maybe closer than you think. Alright. So, first of all, this is by the same designers as made Twilight Struggle, which I gotta have kicking around somewhere in view, but I don't see it. I don't know. Not gonna look too hard for it, because I got kind of a mess over here that's like, might be under there somewhere, I don't know. That's all World War II stuff. I would expect it kind of kicking around in the Cold War stuff, but I don't know where it made its way to. Anyway, when I did my review, when I did my playthroughs discussions, I did a couple on Twilight Struggle. It was kind of one of my CDG winners that kind of convinced me, hey, let's try a lot of CDGs. And a little less excited by that mechanism overall. But one of the things I think I said, hard to tell, was, hey, this two-person global struggle can be matched by one other, world encompassing bipolar world in terms of power struggle, which is that between France and England during the Grand Century. And this game, I'd like to flatter myself, maybe one of the designers heard that and it helped spark the idea, or maybe they were working on it already. It is a pretty obvious thing, just like, when I looked at 1960 and said, hey, there are some multiplayer ones, where then I started seeing things coming out of Numbskull games that, handled that. First the 1860 with Divided Republic, and then Bull Moose. But I do like to flatter myself that maybe I have some sort of impact, either directly or maybe indirectly. Someone else remembers it vaguely and catches it, rather than I'm just stating the obvious that everybody is thinking already, which is probably the actual case. Anyway, that was one of the things. And when I saw that Imperial Struggle was coming out with these same two designers who had made a game that, it's not absolutely up my alley, but it's an enjoyable light CDG that covers an interesting period in terms of Twilight Struggle. I'm like, yeah, I'm all in, and I pre-order it. And by the time it was ready to print and everything, I was already pretty sure this isn't actually a CDG. And seeing it, obviously, it's not. What is it? Well, I took the time to play it through once because it is complicated enough. It's a massive interweb of decisions that I felt like in order to understand the game, unlike with Twilight Struggle, I really had to screw around with it and figure it out, at least a little bit, so that I can get some of the mechanical aspects down right. Well, my impression at this point is that it's essentially a very thematically related to the time period, to the subject matter, super heavy Euro. It reminds me a lot of the modern, very heavy Euros that I actually absolutely hate. When I'm going to play a Euro, I don't want to be balancing this huge point salad and trying to figure out what's going on in it. On the other hand, you're also talking about right in my sweet spot in terms of this is a period of tremendous interest to me. The bipolar world, two-player conflict to handle this is as applicable as Twilight Struggle. So, I'm not immediately disappointed, but after having played it, I agree with everything that I said already. Those were my first impressions before I started looking at it, and they've pretty much held out. It is as far as I can tell, reasonably designed. There's no like, there's this killer strategy that'll just beat everything. But there are things that are incredibly stupid you can do. And maybe we'll touch on some of them. Let's talk about what you get and then start digging into the rules. I'm hoping this won't take too long. The rulebook itself isn't too long, but like a lot of Euros, it doesn't really give you the best feel for what's going on. And some of that may be just the simple fact that it is kind of an obfuscated and impenetrable system of victory point salad mixing. Okay, so what do you have? Well, you have the board. Let's talk about the board. Turn record track, 4 areas, regions in the world, some of which are divided into subregions. 2 of them are. That impact certain events in the game that happen. You have a number of different type of spaces. The most common seem to be these markets, which have an associated good with them. You have an award space, which is going to be the score for that region in every peace turn. Well, let's talk about the turn record track for a moment. So the turn record track has 6 peace turns interspaced with 4 war turns. And the war turns are basically just an extra scoring phase that comes after the peace turn. So you do all the work for the war during the peace turn. It's not like a game on the same subject, but multiplayer, Grand Sequel over here, which, boy, was I excited about and seriously disappointed. I mean, it wasn't a horrible game. It just was not Europa Universalis Light or anything like it. It didn't have that same feel. It had some neat ideas, though. And one of those neat ideas is you play out the peace periods rather quickly, and then you go into detail in the war. Here, you play out the peace periods like in a Euro, maybe equally applicable, maybe that's applicable. But then the war is just simply an extra scoring round that comes at the end of that peace turn. And each peace turn has its own scoring round. Okay. So anyway, back to the board. So you got these markets, they have a resource associated with them, and those resources can cause scoring. You have political spaces, which include alliances, and they include non-alliance political spaces. Alliances are going to come with little dots on them, which indicate which wars they have some impact on, which war turns they have some impact on. They may actually impact multiple wars within a war turn, and we'll get to that in a moment. But it's a quick way of kind of giving you some idea of when something's valuable. Unfortunately, they left some of the markers off on Spain. They made a lot of errors in this game. There's a fair amount of errata in the rulebook, which is unfortunately glossy and did not take pencil at all. I thought after the glossy rulebook I had in Stellar Horizons over there, which was a recent thing I did, where I was able to actually pencil things in with, I don't know where I put it, a regular kind of number 2 wooden pencil as opposed to a mechanical pencil. This did not take that at all, so I had to go to my Sharpie, and that's not there. And of course, not the easiest thing to write with, and it can smudge and all kind of problems. So, the dangers of glossy rule books, apparently they're cheaper to make, and that's all we're going to see from the bigger companies probably. Same way as you only see them from textbooks, this thin glossy paper. The board is a nice solid, it's a GMT good hard board. Okay. So what else do we have? We have territories, which are these square boxes that aren't sitting on their corner. Those are things that can only be taken during wars. They kind of indicate, actual owned areas that can only be handed over, usually as a conquest value. Other things can too, but you have forts, which are these hexagons, which have an effect on wars. So again, they have their dots in them. Also that are hexagons are naval spaces, and I think they all have a little star in them. And they also indicate which war, and an anchor in the middle, which wars they're applicable on. Each of these has somewhat different ways that you can control them. In general, control markers are these little flag markers, and you'll see there's Spain. That's an optional rule that I'm going to play with. But for the most part, things are flagged with either France or Britain. The other option, Spain, and then the US is also in the game eventually. It has a few flags, which can extend into Canada. Okay, so where do we go from there? You have a Navy box, which holds ships that are not allocated to doing something. They're not in a ship box. You have lines between regions, which indicate connectivity. That's important for being able to trace back to something in order to flag it. In terms of certain things, it can cause isolation, which weakens them and makes them easier to take. You have these. These are bonus counters, or advantage tiles, they're called. If you have flagged all the things that connect to it, so Mysore is the only thing that connects to this, you get that advantage tile, and then you'll be able to use its abilities. But there are limits. You're only allowed to use 2 per play, basically, per action phase, and there are 4 action phases in a turn, so having more than 8 of them isn't terribly helpful. It's not a good idea, though, not to take any, which is something I found. They definitely are potentially important. Some of them are more valuable than others. Some of them are misprinted more than others. What I found with them, we get a couple, each player has their own player aid. One side is the sequence of play, which covers the normal sequence of play and the war sequence of play. The other side covers all the different advantage tiles that are available, and they're available throughout the game for the most part. One exception, the Sons of Liberty isn't available until you enter the Revolutionary Era. Actually, only during the Revolutionary Era, and it gives you some capability. I didn't realize that that goes away. It gives you some capability to cause some disruption in North America during the Revolution. So you've got different advantage tiles listed here. The information on here is correct as far as I know. You also have on here the bonus strengths that apply to each war zone during a given war period or war turn. And some of them overlap, and some of them may not be exactly what you expect. They're also written on the war sheet, but we'll get to that in a bit. Let's see what else we have. Over here, you have a general records track. That's going to keep track of your general records. That's going to keep track of a couple of different things. First of all, victory points. Like in Twilight Struggle, you're playing on, a linear victory point track. If it gets down to 0, the Brits win. If it gets to 30, the French win. At the end of any phase, basically. So there's some chance to go over temporarily. Some other things you track on here is debt limit, which is how much debt you can have and how much debt you do have. The difference between those is going to be your available debt, which applies sometimes somewhat importantly. There's at least one card that's a little weird where I think it should be referring to available debt and is actually talking about debt, and I didn't see it in the errata though. And you have something called treaty points. Debt and treaty points can both be used for similar actions. So you can take on debt, which is a bad thing, in order to get points to do stuff with. Treaty points are basically free equivalents to that. You can spend treaty points as you get them to get points that you can do other stuff with. And there are multiple types of points in the game, which are generated through these things. We'll get to them in a bit. Okay, on the war table, well, each player mat. Player mat has a number of different things on it as well. It has space for your advantage tiles, space for 2 ministry cards. At the beginning of each period, you're allowed to put 2 of your ministry cards face down on here. Your opponent doesn't know what they do. You have a limited set for each period. If you play the cards, and it usually seems advantageous to do so, in your first turn of the period, there's 2 turns in each period, 2 peace turns in each period, you're stuck with that card for the next turn in the period. But if you end up not using a card, you can replace it in the next turn of the period, which is kind of interesting, but whatever. It might mean that you look at your cards and say, you know what, I really want this one for this turn. I might want this one this turn, but I probably don't. So I'll try to hold off on using it because there may be something more important for next turn or whatever. I don't have that kind of self-control. You've got 4 wars in the game. Each one has its own sheet. Most of the wars have 4 different sub-wars in them. Each sub-war covers a specific map. So this one, for example, will be fought over Europe. You end up counting up a combination of 2 things. One is your basic war tiles, which come from this pool, and they're kind of a mix of good and bad. None of them are terrible, but the worst ones they give you a -1 strength, but you still get to do some damage by unflagging an enemy area, doing some raiding. Everybody gets one of their base war tiles in each of the wars. Then you're allowed to purchase bonus war tiles is what they're called. And these tend to be better, so this one gives a +1 bonus, and it also has an effect. I think they all give you at least a +1 bonus, and some of them give effects. More of the base war tiles give effects, but those that do tend to give very limited military advantage. What you're going to do is you're going to add up the tiles here plus any bonus strength you get. And it lists the countries where you get bonus strength from. So for example, in Central Europe, you get from these European countries. And those will all be marked with a 1 dot on them. Now that doesn't mean they're the only things that have the 1 dot. So for example, if you look here, Spain is not in Central Europe. Spain is its own separate war, also in Europe. Okay. So you add up the value of these plus any bonuses you have, and some of those bonuses won't just be military spaces. Some of them will be things like conflict markers on the enemy's flags, which just indicate he's having so much trouble in that area that gives points against him. Third European War. This is the only time you're going to see that. Okay, so then each player comes to a total in the war, and depending on the difference between their values, the winner gets a certain value of victory points plus conquest points, which allow them to take enemy flags. This is the only way you can take enemy territories, and it's the most likely way you can take enemy forts. But the loser can also gain something, usually treaty points, just as kind of a consolation prize because they participated. Yeah, whatever. All right, the next thing over here, there's an event deck. There's a bunch of event cards. We'll take a look at one from a different era. There are 3 eras in the game corresponding to these colors. They have a name. They have a bonus. This one, the bonus is a misprint, which I should correct. I thought all the misprints were in the rule book. I didn't realize they fucked up the components too. But yeah, that shouldn't be there. In this particular case, let's look at another one. This one has scholarship. That's something called a keyword. What a keyword can do is your ministry cards also have keywords on them. So, you can find one. Here's one with scholarship. What that means is you get an extra bonus off this card if you have that keyword showing, and you can reveal it immediately if it's one of your 2 ministry cards. What you're going to be doing quite often is looking at the events that you have at the beginning of a turn, especially the first turn in a period, and choose, to some extent, your events. You may have to discard events if you're over 3, but choose your ministry cards based on the events that you have. because if you can trigger that bonus, you get not only the normal event from the card, but you'll also get this additional advantage. So Bings shouldn't have a bonus, and that's actually fine because it doesn't say anything on there about a bonus effect. So it's perfectly fine that it has a bonus with no effect. So I don't have to correct that card. Good. Okay. These event cards are divided into 2 players. The Brits are on top, the French are on the bottom in many cases, but not all. This one, for example, does not. One's misprinted to have the symbols on it when it does not have them under effect. That's pretty clear. So far, I'm not bothered with the changes to the cards. The changes to the board are pretty minor. They're over here. There are some changes, I think, to some of the tiles, though, which is more problematic. They say something that doesn't apply. What always applies is what's on the player aid, which if I noticed the difference, I would do, but you know, it's easier to see the tiles, so you don't necessarily look them up. What do you have in counters? You have bunches and bunches of flags. You have these conflict markers, which I've already kind of explained. On the back side, they have something called conflict +1, which supposedly some cards tell you to use, and I have no idea what that does. I didn't see it. You have these E markers. They're used to exhaust abilities. Some of the ministry cards will say things like once per turn. And one of them says, at the beginning of your turn, this one, at the start of each turn, increase your debt limit by 1. Boy, is that annoying. I played with that way. Now I looked and saw that's in the errata. That's once per turn. Yep, one of the cards is kind of bad, but I can remember that too. So yeah, when you use one of those abilities, you mark it a once per turn, you mark it with one of these and say, I did that. What's not clear in the rules or anywhere else that I could find is, hey, this has a once per turn here, supposedly, and there are a number that do, and a once per turn here. Do you have to fire them off at the same time? You know, or is it one or the other or whatever? One of the designers answered that, nope, you mark them both with ease. Okay, well, nice to tell. You know, that definitely should have been spelled out in the rules better. When forts take damage, they get this marker. I don't know. They're the same on each side. You have different bonus war tiles. There's a different bonus war tile set for each war. However, they're exactly the same in terms of effects. The only thing they give you is a little bit of flavor, you know. Do you have George Washington there or the Duke of Marlborough, you know? But yeah, there's a different set for each one, and each time you end a war, you shuffle, you replace them, or you could just reshuffle the old ones if you don't care about the historical aspect. We got a few special markers here, which are triggered by cards or by wars, depending on them. Some of the times there are things in the rules that are kind of less than clear, or in the card and charts and such not. One last thing we haven't looked at here is, this is sort of, you know, the regular, this is the thing that holds stuff. So you got a draw pile, a discard pile here. As you use investment tiles, they get moved over here. We can show you some investment tiles. So investment tiles look like this, and they're going to have a major action here, which is one of 3 types of actions. Either, we deal a few out. This is the military symbol, this is the diplomacy symbol, and this down here is the economic symbol. So those are the 3 types of actions you can have. You have a major action, which for the most part, which gives you points that you can spend throughout the world, and in multiple spaces. But if you spend it in different map areas, there's a cost to doing so. And you don't get that many points, you know, 4 points. The exception to that is military, which you can actually spend throughout the world without a problem. The minor action allows you to touch 1 space. And it doesn't allow you to unflag spaces. Something that I didn't notice until I started getting cards that allowed me to unflag spaces with minor action. And yeah, it's in the rules, but it's not terribly clear. You're going to deal out a set of 9 of these. Each player gets to pick 4 of them, and they take turns drafting them. They've got to make their own decisions of what's important to them to go first, etc. Okay, let's take a look at the sequence of play and the rules and such now, and see what we can say. One thing that there's not a very good list of all the iconography that's used in the game. You can dig through the rules and find the different places. You know what? I'm able to to combine videos pretty easily, so I need to take a break from my poor throat. Something else I didn't cover. This global demand section up here. So there's 6 global demand chits, 1 for each commodity, and you're going to basically randomize them at the start of each turn to determine 3 of the 6 commodities that are worth going after. There are cards that can play around with them. In each period, they have a certain effect. Whoever has the most of a given commodity, and these are limited, so like fish and fur is in North America, tobacco and sugar is in the Caribbean, silk and cotton are in India, and there's no, you're not competing across multiple areas or anything like that, which I don't know how I feel about that. Certainly there was cotton going on over here. That's about all I can really say about it. So there are reasons you might want to do it in a different way, but whatever. Depending on the period that it's in, it generates different points for the top player. Most of the points are good. However, when it says plus 1D, and I didn't notice spice is always minus 1D, which is good. When it says plus 1D, that means in addition to getting victory points, you get saddled with some additional debt. That's because of the harsh growing requirements for the tobacco. I'm not quite sure why the fish. That one wasn't explained. Okay. Okay. It's a concept of protected locations, which is a flagged space that's connected to either a squadron that you have deployed on the board or a fort. And those are the hexagonal things, the squadrons and forts. That will make it more expensive or cheaper to do certain things in some cases. The investment tiles themselves have some additional markers on them that I didn't explain. So this major action, minor action, we also have this little dagger, which is for an event. You can't play an event card unless you have an event. And further than that, you can't play an event card unless you match the event card. Take a look at this. So some of the event cards have a type. It has to match the major type of the card that's playing them, but not all of them do. This one, for example, could be played with any event tile. And again, there's abilities that allow you to modify these things. The final thing, let's see if we can get one. This is an early step in the game, so I don't mind dealing these out. Nothing important happens before it. Well, we didn't get it. So there's a little circle of arrows or whatever that can also show up on there. What that means is you're allowed to pick one of your basic war tiles that's on the board, pick another basic war tile, and decide which one you want to keep, which one you want to put in that location. The one that you don't keep either gets discarded, I think face up to your basic war tiles, that way you won't have to reshuffle it, or you can take it completely out of the game if it's a really shitty one. So you've got some capability with those events to pick pare down your war tiles. It's not like a real deck builder or anything, but you have a little bit of deck cutting. Okay. We got the boatsies. Forgot to mention them. They're used to control these spaces, and they use a different kind of placement mechanism to most of the stuff in the game. Like I said, a lot of it's similar, but a little different. But much of it is just, I go to a space, I spend some points, and I get to flag that space, or I unflag the opponent's position there. Conflict markers can be placed due to cards for the most part, or special abilities, but they're removed, and this is very useful. They're removed by doing the remove conflict marker action, which costs 1 or 2 military. So you need to have military operations available. If it's in a protected space, it only costs you 1. If you don't have a fort or a ship nearby, it's going to cost you 2 to clean that conflict up, because it's harder to get the troops there, whatever. Okay. Let's go briefly through the sequence of play, since that's all the next parts of it. Okay. This is really kind of just procedural. It's going through the sequence, some maintenance with the cards. On turns 3 and 5, those are special turns where the era changes. Each player gets some additional debt. You will always reveal new award tokens, which are going to be the victory point value of a region. Whoever has the most flags in that region gets that value. But some of the award markers, we'll flip these over because, again, this is something we do early in the turn. Some of them, like this one's not worth anything, but it produces a treaty point. The more valuable ones, so let's see if we got one. Nope. The more valuable ones are worth 2 or 3 victory points. There's one of each, but they require you to win by 2. So you don't just have the majority of flags in that region. You have to have more than the majority. Okay. And that includes naval spaces, so it's not just flags. Okay, so let's keep going through here. Global demand, you randomly pick 3 of those. All exhausted markers get moved back. Usually cleanups at the end of a turn. Yeah, not in the case of this game. Those 9 tiles are revealed. You also get 3 event cards each. And if you have more than 3 at this point, you have to discard down to 3. Then if it's the first turn of the era, you pick your 2 ministry cards. If it's the second turn of the era and you have a face down one, you can swap it out. Initiative is going to be for whoever's losing. I don't remember what the tie. I believe the tiebreaker goes to France. France has the initiative on the first turn of the game, but it may go to something else, like the person who had it last gets to keep it, or the other person gets it. Whoever has the initiative gets to decide which player goes first. Okay, then each player takes an action phase, and then the next player takes an action phase, and they alternate until they've each used 4 of them. Those action phases consist of the following. First thing you do is you look at the investment tiles and choose one that you want to use. And there's a lot of thought that goes into that if you're playing well. If you're me, you probably use less thought than you should. Then, if you wish, and you have an event symbol or something else that allows you to, you may play one of your event cards. The event card kind of trumps in at this point. It has to be fully evaluated. Not all of its effects necessarily take place, which is to say, if you have bonus points that come from the event card, those accumulate and you can use them during your action. But if the event card does something on the board, it just does it. And
they happen kind of simultaneously, which means you can't use that event card to help you obtain some value from the event card. Okay. The event card can give you points of a kind that you don't have off your tile. Or they can give you points of a kind you have on your tile. You have a couple of choices. If it's of the same type that you have on your tile, either for major or minor, you can combine those points together and use them in the major or minor action for that tile. If they're separate, they are automatically, and you always have this option, they are automatically treated as a different major action. This is important because when a minor action only affects one space on the board, and a major action, while it can be used everywhere, it does cost you a point to shift from one theater to another. So those bonus points can be very, very valuable. And remember, even though you have maybe one bonus point, you can augment it with treaty points or debt, and that can allow you to actually do something pretty impressive. You know, as opposed, like 1 point isn't very valuable, but 1 point, the action is the valuable thing here, the ability to play somewhere where maybe you couldn't otherwise. Okay. Let's talk about the different things you can do. So, military, the military upgrade, I already kind of explained that. That's when you swap out a thing. Okay, economic actions. Economic actions can do a few things for you. Not many. They can allow you to shift a market, a circular space. You have to connect that market back to a territory, fort, or naval space that you have. Or connect to another market that does not contain a conflict marker, isn't isolated, and didn't change control during the current action round. Something's isolated if it can't trace a chain back to the fort, naval space, or territory. So basically, you can operate from a base of a naval space, a territory, which are very hard to change hands, or a fort. And it's very difficult to get yourself inserted without one of those things available. Okay. You can't daisy chain markets. You can't move from one market to the next. But I believe you can, in the same action round. But I believe you can daisy chain other things, which is, other things don't have really that capability. So there aren't going to be 2 forts in a row. So markets are the only thing where it's really an issue. But you can use a fort that you took control of in the current action round to then do an economic action to advance into the market. Now, your major and minor tile action off your tile and your bonus action, you can do those in any order you like. You do one at a time. So like if you do the minor, you do the entire minor, then you go to the major. Well, the biggie is the major is usually the one that requires more than one thing. The cost for a market is going to be the number in the space. That's the general rule here. However, that cost is 1 if you're going to unflag an enemy isolated market, or if you're flagging or unflagging a market with a conflict marker. Whenever a market with a conflict marker changes its state, owned, unowned, whatever, the conflict marker comes off. So the conflict ends as soon as you pay to do something to it. Okay. If a market is protected, i.e. next to somebody else's military capabilities, well, to the other players, you have to pay an extra 1 in order to influence it. So again, military assets are important even for your economic side of things. All right, let's go to diplomatic actions. Basically, two things you can do with diplomatic actions. One is draw an event, which will cost you 3 diplomacy points. That's not in the rule book at all, hence this. And that's where I tried to write in pencil, and it just didn't take on this. The main thing that you would do, though, is shift a political space. Now, shifting a political space, those are the diamonds. Again, it costs you the value of the space to take the flag away from it or to put a new flag. The nice thing about political spaces are you don't really have to connect to them in any way. They're sort of off on their own, and you can just influence them no matter where you are. So that's kind of cool. Pretty simple. Military actions are more complicated than everything else. Now, economic and diplomatic actions, you pay a cost if you want to shift between theaters. This is not the case with military actions. Military actions, you have a whole bunch of different choices here. So you can buy a bonus war tile. That's going to cost you 2 military points, and you can only buy 2 of these in one action round. And you look at it and decide which theater you want to put in it. You can't have more than 2 bonus ones in any given theater of the war. Construct a squadron. Costs you 4, and you move one of your squadrons from unbuilt into the Navy box. Deploy a squadron. This is more complicated. So it costs you 1 point to deploy a squadron from any space on the board, including the Navy box, to any empty space that can take the Navy. It costs you more if you want to boot somebody out of a space that they're in. If you're already on the map, and I thought it was in the same region, but apparently not, it costs you 2 military points. If you're going from the Navy box, it costs you 3. 1 to deploy to the map, plus 2 to actually move the other guy. What happens to the other guy is they leave the space they're in and go to the Navy box. Okay. It's more expensive to chase people away than it is to deploy. We have some more here. Constructing a fort. Okay, constructing a fort, you have to control a market, naval space, or territory connected to the fort. Doesn't matter if it's isolated. That's kind of neat. And you pay the cost of the fort to get there. So, for example, Ohio Forks costs 3 military action to get in there. You must have controlled it at the start of the action round, though. An opposing fort space cannot normally be taken during a peace turn unless it has a damage marker. If it has a damage marker, you repair or seize damaged fort. That's going to, if you're seizing someone else's damaged fort, you have to have the connection, and you pay 1 more than the original cost, and you take that flag away from them, and you get it yours there. If you have a damaged fort, it costs 1 less than the base cost, and you get rid of the damage marker. You can remove conflict markers. The normal cost of this is 2 military action, but if you're in a protected space, you can remove it for only 1. Now, there's that +1 conflict marker. I don't know what those are. I didn't see any, but they're pretty limited. You can build new squadrons. I told you that for 4. Let's see if we've caught everything here. Looks like it. Okay. The concept of debt. Anytime during your action round, you can get action points on a 1-for-1 basis by taking on additional debt. If you choose to pass during an action round, you can reduce your current debt by 2. That means giving up a chit, though, and chits are worth, I think, a minimum of 5 action points. So reducing debt is a really expensive proposition. You cannot take debt on voluntarily, if it would put you past your debt limit marker. However, if you're forced to, instead of getting additional debt, you start losing victory points. Some cards are based on available debt, which is the comparison between the debt limit and the current debt. Okay. The wars are just really a mechanical thing, and I've kind of explained them. You flip over the tiles, you compare the points on them, you take the impact of those tiles that have special effects before you add up all the values. So some will cause some debt to happen. Some will allow you to damage a fort or remove a fleet, which that's going to change the value of the war. And some have a crossed out flag symbol, which allows you to unflag an opposing market or political space without a conflict marker. But they might not do anything. You can't isolate markets with a market destruction unless it's necessary somehow. Yeah. Okay. So then you take the points that are generated here plus whatever 1 point each bonus strength locations you have. Now I say 1 point each, but like something may say Spain. Spain has 2 spaces each worth a point in it towards any war that includes Spain. Okay. You total the strength and you look on here and see what the impact is. You're allowed to capture enemy territories. Well, not just enemy territories. You're allowed to take conquest points. They can be taken in a number of different places. So the first limitation is you're allowed to take, well, let's get to the specifics here because this is kind of weird. Forts, markets, naval spaces, and territories can be taken for CPs. To take a fort, market, or naval space, it must be physically in the theater that it's in. Now, there's an optional rule that makes forts a little harder to conquest. They become more like territories. To take a territory, it has to be in the current theater, right? Not region, I think. And listed on the war display in the current theater's available territory, or listed in the war display on the current theater's territories. So here, this is on the Europe map as the theater. So I don't know what's up with that. But the available territories include Gibraltar, St. Augustine, and a few other locations in the New World from that battle. Why would you be able to take Gibraltar from this? Yeah, I don't know. From the Central European War. And why wouldn't you be able to anyway? That's what I'm kind of getting. So I'm going to look to see the definition of theater. I know they're kind of a little crappy on the definitions. Like at least some things in the questions that have been posted online have been like, yeah, we should have stated that differently. It's kind of like, oh, great. So map. There are regions divided into sub-regions. I don't like that, right? Okay. So here's the deal. The European map, I would say, is not a theater, and you're really kind of limited to the territories that can be taken there off of that. There aren't a lot of territories in Europe. There's Gibraltar and Minorca, and that's it. So they both show up in the Central Europe map. The others show up in the New World. So they are these Hudson Bay for some reason. Arcadia, you know. Okay. So if you're taking a fort, market, or naval space, it costs you 1 conquest point. You have to be, you take the flag, you get the flag in that space, and that may mean removing the enemy as well. For naval space, you have to have a squadron somewhere in the theater or on the Navy box, and you place it in the desired space, and the enemy gets displaced into the naval box. You can only do this once per war. A war is the entire card. For territories, things are a little different. You have to pay the listed CP price, which I think is always 1. I think every territory has a 1, so, you know. And you must control a fort, naval space, or other territory connected with a conquest line to the desired territory. Conquest lines are something special. They're these weird little dashed lines. They go further than some of the regional lines do. So you'll see Champlain Valley takes me all the way down to the northern colonies. There's not a direct connection through them. No reason for one, really. Again, also here, Ohio Forks takes me all the way up to Champlain Valley. No, I'm sorry, it doesn't. Does it? No, it takes me all the way up to Quebec and Montreal, but it doesn't reach Champlain Valley. So you're kind of like, your locational connectiveness is a little weird. There are things you can take from certain places that you can't take from others. There are a couple of cases. So you'll notice Ohio Forks does not connect to Champlain Valley. That's a little odd, I would say, actually. But what's not odd is Louisburg and Halifax connecting. Now, normally, that doesn't matter because you can just take forts, right? Yeah, except that there's a special rule, and I may not play with this simply because this connection's not there. It should be. Which makes the forts harder to take. You have to have a connection line. This connection line makes no sense without the optional rule, which is not in the rules, but whatever. Okay. Okay. If you don't want to give up a territory, just a territory, that's the only thing, you can refuse. And the first time you refuse in a given war, it'll cost you 3 victory points. The second time will cost you 5. So you had better really want that territory. That's a lot of victory points. There's some special cases that some of the wars give. For example, creation of the U.S., destruction of the Jacobite cause. Then you check to see if you won every theater in the war with maximum possible victories points. If you did, you win the game automatically. What I did not mention is the sequence of play over here. Somehow I got shifted to war. We did the scoring here. There's a victory point phase here. You have to win all 4 awards, not the prestige, that's a lie, and all 3 global commodities. So if you get the award points for all 4 of the global and all 3 of the commodities, you also automatically win the game. What is the prestige point? I didn't explain that. So the prestige point is this green triangle here. Europe, well, after you assess all the territories and supposedly the global, but I always do it in a different order and it doesn't make a difference. There's this extra 2-point award that's gathered from all areas that have these little green squares around them. Those little green squares, whoever has the most flags of that gets that extra 2-point award. They're all in Europe with the exception of 2 in the Americas that can happen if the US is created. Okay. Okay, the advantage tiles. At the end of a war, you set up the next war. Okay, the advantage tiles, you control them by controlling all the spaces that connect to them. As soon as you connect to them all, you get the advantage tile, but you're not allowed to use it that round. And spaces that have conflict in them give you the advantage tile, so you've had it for time counter, but you're not allowed to use it, which there's not really a good way to record that. You may want to throw a conflict tile on the advantage tile. How they're used, you mark it with an exhausted marker and apply the effect. You can use them at any time during your action round, but not before you take the before you take the event and assess the bonus condition of the event card. You can't use it in the same round it's been taken. You're only allowed to activate 2 per action round and no more than 1 per region per action round. Wow, I didn't realize that. Some advantages require you to pay something. Okay, that's great. Well, here's what's not covered there. And this is what confuses me. The ones that tell you that you have to pay something, let's take a look at one of these. So this gives you -1 coin to unflag something in India. Great. If I'm going to do an unflagging, well, this actually gives you -1 coin to an unflagging action on a silk space in India. That's not explained there, but it is explained here. In order to find that, you have to look at the name. The name is Silk, which is a good cue there, and it costs 1 less economic point to unflag a market in India. So you have to be allowed to unflag a market, and it just gives you a bonus on that, and that's fine. Those are bonuses that, you know, when you're playing that action, you have to try to account for, but it's not that big a deal. This doesn't cost anything. Let's see if there's any that do. So these are 1 total to unflag. My take on that is you're spending the point in North America. So that is your entire minor action if you're using your minor action to do that. Or it dedicates the major action to North America, which means if you want to split areas, you have to spend an extra point to do it. I'm looking to see whether we have any. There are some that cost you to do something. Yeah. So this is 1 point total diplomatic to unflag something. So that is similar to this, yeah. All right, I don't see anything. And remember, the military ones are a little bit more flexible with, but the economic and diplomatic ones, they can be kind of crappy because it's like a minor action on something that reduces something, you know, to a 1 point cost. That uses your entire minor action to do. Of course, you might have a major action that's a bonus action with only 1 point that you can use for that. What's important about this is you have to have those points. And from my interpretation of the rules, and I don't see anything that goes one way or the other on this, you're not allowed to generate, you know, points off debt or treaty points just to trigger one of those actions, one of those advantage tiles. So you have to have an action that allows you to trigger the advantage tile. You have to have points from that action, and you can commit, and those could be bonus points, and you can commit treaty points or debt to give you additional points for that, if that makes sense. Okay. USA ends up on the board with flags. They end up scoring in the final scoring for the French, but only during the final scoring. Does the final scoring make a damn difference? So the final scoring doesn't give you much. it does give you victory points for having a flag in a territory controlled by the other player at the beginning of the game. So, for example, if this is US, that would be worth 2 victory points at the final scoring phase. But to get to the final scoring phase, you can't have an automatic victory on any of the peace turns due to getting all the awards, including the demand awards. You can't have anybody win an automatic victory due to winning maximum results in all the wars for that, or in all the theaters for that war. And no one can have reached 0 or 30 at the end of a scoring cycle. At which point, if you get to that, then you follow this further thing. Prestige gives you another 2 points. Available debt, whoever has the least available debt gets kind of penalized. Each commodity is worth 1 point for controlling it. And then each friendly flag that you've stolen from, each location that you've stolen from another player's, each territory that you've taken another player and flagged their area, you get 2 victory points for. And that's the one place the US counts, is it takes points away from the British and gives them to the French. And that is it. You have an index, which was unable to find the one thing that I had a question on, which ended up being, how do I put this? Is it here? No. I think it's on the other side of this one. Basically, there's an Atlantic dominance battle, which then impacts the French and Indian War in North America. And basically, what happens is you get this Atlantic dominance shit, and it says place it in the French and Indian War. And I'm here thinking, 7 Years' War. I'm thinking of it as French and Indian War. And I'm like, well, where do I put it? And I'm looking around on the map and I see nothing. Well, it's kind of a hex. It's not the right size. And there's another one for Bing. He gets placed somewhere in a similar manner off a card. But again, when you start putting too much of the rules only on player aids, cards, stuff like that, and CDGs have this problem, you end up having things that maybe aren't as well described as elsewhere. The playbook contains some examples of play. It doesn't cover everything, though, and it doesn't cover all the problems. It has historical information on the ministry cards, on the bonus war tiles that are specified to certain people. What it doesn't have is any further exposition about how the card should be used or whatever. That's about it. Like I said, this is a game that is... There's some level of strategy to it, in the sense that, you can have this general picture of, well, I'm going to aim to win the 7 Years' War. I got this plan that's going to work or something. You could have that level of strategy in it. But it feels like what you're doing is largely opportunistic play, at least for me. There is this balance that you're trying, to violate in your favor, or to get an automatic victory by just winning everywhere big, which is possible because here's the thing. Treaty points give you an advantage to winning either all the award chits or a war, even if you're way behind in victory points. But if you're way behind in victory points, chances are someone else has been doing something pretty good. Like they've been winning the award chits for a while, so they probably have a good board position. So I don't know how much you can sneak that in there. You might be able to win something without appearing to be dominating on the board, though. You might be able to win the automatic victory that way. Other than that, though, you're basically just aiming for, hey, I want to score these points. Now, yes, Twilight Struggle has the same kind of point salad type situation, but it's such a simple system. you know, that it kind of comes, you catch it a little quicker. You catch the idea of it. Maybe not the optimal play or whatever. That probably involves having to analyze the deck of cards completely, you know, and all that kind of crap that I have no interest in doing. But this game, at the very, you know, first level of it, is kind of the, I'm going to obfuscate, the design decision here is, I'm going to obfuscate what you need to win. So you're not going to be able to see that really clearly. And the game will slowly reveal it and throw into that to make it replayable so that, you know, one strategy, one pattern doesn't just always win. There's a fair amount of randomness to, you know, where the award tiles show up, which different these come up, which events you're handed in your hand and everything. So you have to make these choices based on the specifics of the game. But those choices don't feel anything like a simulation. It just feels like you're optimizing points over this, you know, massive web of Euro game. And that is clearly not my style. However, it does kind of tell a story. There's games like Endeavor that I thought were really cool. They were a lot simpler, which I generally favor. If I'm going to play something that's kind of Euro-ish, and this even applies with the coin games, which I feel are actual simulations, it's just the thinking doesn't feel like, well, not all of them. I would say Falling Sky is not. But, you know, the more modern ones that are actually counterinsurgency in the modern sense of the word. The decision cycle for those feels like the decision cycle of an area control game, where I'm trying to collect points and I'm trying to balance and make sure that one of the factions doesn't win automatic victory or whatever. Here I Stand feels that way too, though. But the problem with this for me is this is taking that complexity level up. Not, you know, in the sense that war games get more complex, where they're simulating more and more details. This is just more complex point salad optimization, you know, over a more difficult sphere. And my thoughts on it are, look, Twilight Struggle is what it is because it caught that historical aspect, but also provided a nice, easy play level. Now, the world of the Euro has changed. That fairly nice, easy play level, and some people thought Twilight Struggle was pretty heavy at its time, but I mean, it wasn't, you know, I mean, it wasn't raw, but it also wasn't, you know, it wasn't at the level of complexity that the modern Euro is by any means. And those modern Euros are just getting more and more stuff kind of clumped onto them to make it so that they're a challenge. Because, I don't know, people don't want to play Go or chess or bridge or the challenge games that like have existed for centuries. I mean, I'm not totally dissonant for that. It's just that's not my kind of game. And that's where my worry is here. We'll play through it. I had trouble mustering up the energy to make it through my sort of playthrough that I did before I did this so that I could kind of get a feel for it. I had no such difficulty with the coin games that I've played recently. I had no such difficulty with Nevsky. This one, though, it's just kind of like, wow, I'm just doing all this optimization problem again and again and trying to figure out, well, how long can I hold off playing this card and everything. And, you know, I don't know if it's that different from Here I Stand, to tell you the truth. And I loved Here I Stand. But maybe if I revisited it now, I would say, wow, it looks a little too much like, you know, just this horrible optimization problem. victory points. On the other hand, maybe playing this a second time because the topic is so engrossing for me. Like Here I Stand is. Maybe it will do enough, to get me excited. Or maybe I've just become even more cantankerous than I was 10 years ago. I don't know. We'll send this up.